Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to BAJIRAO IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 30th April 2024 and we have few important news articles from the Hindu. So first important news article that we will discuss as part of our discussion is about the rising temperatures in the Indian Ocean. So how the rising temperatures in the Indian Ocean play a very important role in the Indian monsoon or influencing Indian monsoon, and at the same time how the rising temperatures over the Indian Ocean actually impact the aquatic ecosystem. So we will also understand the causes or the reasons and implications of rising temperatures in the Indian Ocean. Secondly, we will also understand about the poultry industry and the reforms which required in this poultry industry. Now, in recent times, we have seen the avian influenza virus, and that has been impacting the poultry industry, at the same time the human health also. So we will look at the poultry industry from the perspective of avian influenza and the reforms that are required in the poultry industry. And after that, we will also understand the recent Forest Conservation Amendment Act and how the Forest Conservation Amendment Act actually stripped the legal status for the unclassed forests. So we will also understand what exactly these unclassed forests. And after that, we will also look into the elephant corridors and what is the necessity of these elephant corridors, and degradation of the habitat or habitat fragmentation is a major cause of man wildlife conflict, and how the elephant corridors can actually mitigate the man wildlife conflict. So we will try and understand all these important news articles. And let's discuss yesterday's prelims practice question. The question is, under the constitution, concentration of wealth violates which of these provisions? Option A, right to equality under the fundamental rights. Option B, the directive principles of state policy. Option C, right to freedom under fundamental rights. And option D, the concept of welfare state. So this is also part of the directive principles of state policy. However, the correct answer for this question is option B. The concentration of wealth violates the directive principles of state policy, because there was a provision within the directive principles of state policy, that is Article 39 of the Indian Constitution. So Article 39 states that state shall direct its policy towards securing the operation of economic system does not result in the concentration of wealth and means of production to the common detriment. So this is what Article 39 of the Indian Constitution, especially the directive principles of state policy, have been talking about with respect to the concentration of wealth. Now in recent times, we have seen how wealth is being concentrated and how inequalities are being created across the different segments of the society. Poor becoming more poorer and rich becoming more richer, and that is how the wealth is concentrated in India, and that is a clear violation of Article 39 of the Indian Constitution. Please understand this article or this directive principles of state policy is very important in the present context. Okay, so broadly, the directive principles of state policy are actually mentioned in the part 4 of the Indian Constitution, and concentration of wealth violates the directive principles of state policy in general and Article 39 in specific or in particular. So today's prelims practice question, so this is also an important question and this is also recently in news. So please try to answer this question in the comment section. Which of the following statements about Mount Ruang are correct? First statement, it is located in the Andes mountain range. Option B, it is an active volcano located in Indonesia. Option C, it is the highest peak in Africa. And option D, it is a mountain famous for its sky resorts. So the correct answer for this question is option B. Okay. So right, so correct answer for this question is option B. So I've given you the answer as well. So it is an active volcano located in Indonesia. Recently the volcanic eruption had took place in Indonesia, especially from Mount Ruang. So because of that reason it is in news, and detailed explanation for this I'll be providing you in the tomorrow's lecture. So the first article that we're going to start this discussion is with an article on the elephant corridors in Kerala. So building these elephant corridors which connect the fragmented forest lands would actually prevent human wildlife conflict. With respect to Kerala, the elephants venturing into the human habitations is very common, and that is very often leading to the human wildlife conflict. So we have to understand the negative consequences of human wildlife conflict. So the negative consequences, so in general, human wildlife conflict essentially means that the negative interaction between the human populations and the animal species, and that could result in violence or killing of either human beings or the animals. So in recent times, due to human settlements are built in these forest areas, or fragmentation of the forest areas have very often lead to the increased contact between the animals and the human beings, and increased instances of human wildlife conflicts have also significantly increased. So therefore we must address the human wildlife conflicts in this context. Okay, so the context is that man animal conflict in Chinna Canal in Kerala's Idukki district has actually recommended the reopening of the elephant corridor. Now, if we can reopen the elephant corridor, that could significantly minimize the existing man-wildlife conflict. So this elephant corridor should be opened from Annirankal to Old Devikulam in Munnar district of Kerala. So this is what one of the expert panel has actually suggested. Now we'll try and understand what exactly is this elephant corridor. Now elephant corridor is actually a strip. Okay, so for example, imagine that a huge forest area is existing, and due to certain developmental activities or infrastructure projects, what happened, this forest area is being fragmented. For example, NH44 has been passing through this particular National Highway 44 has been passing through a forest area, thereby fragmenting the large forest area into patch A and patch B. Now the animals required the unlimited movement from one place to the another place, so there should be a huge landscape, okay, for the movement of these animals. Now with the laying down of this highway project or laying down of this particular road, what happened, so it has led to the fragmentation of the existing forest area. So therefore we will build corridors that connecting this area A with the B. So this is in a very simple terms elephant corridor. So elephant corridor is actually a strip of land that enables connectivity to otherwise fragmented wildlife habitats. So in this case it is a fragmented wildlife habitat, and elephant corridor has been ensuring connectivity to otherwise fragmented wildlife habitats. In fact, these elephant corridors actually help in animal movement, and they also enable the genetic exchanges among these animals. So thereby we can maintain or sustain the viable elephant populations in those habitats. So that is the overall objective of building these elephant corridors. In fact, these elephant corridors play a very important role in reducing the man-wildlife conflict. Okay, so however, if you look at this particular image, so there are some there's some data and statistics were given with respect to the man-wildlife conflict and elephant populations. Now in fact there are 110 elephant corridors spread across the country. However, so even though we have 110 elephant corridors, only 70% of the corridors are used regularly, and 25% of the corridors are actually used occasionally. Okay, so they were not used regularly, and even 29% of the corridors now encroached by the human settlements, so that also impacts the safe passage of these animals to a fragmented forest landscape. However, 66% of the corridors have highways passing through those forest landscapes. Now imagine that a highway has been passing through a forest landscape. These animals regularly pass from one fragmented forest area to the another fragmented forest area. Now while passing through the highway, there will be animal collisions. So these collisions are also responsible for the declining elephant population. Now it is very common in Assam that the railway tracks have been passing through the forest areas, and that is leading to the collision of trains with the elephants and significantly declining or harming the existing elephant population. So apart from that, if we can look at some more data, some more statistics, 22 corridors already have the railway lines passing through them. So after that, 4 corridors will have new railway lines which will pass through them. Okay, so therefore these infrastructure projects or railways, roadways are actually increasing the human wildlife conflict. So sustainable solution for this is we must build an elephant corridor, and that could address these challenges of collision. Okay, now in this image you can see the location of elephant corridors across different countries or elephant range states, not different countries, different states. Those states are known as elephant range states. Okay, so between 1987 and 2017, approximately 265 elephants were killed by train accidents in different parts of the country. So killing 265 animals due to the train collisions is not a small number. Okay, so therefore we must build these elephant corridors, and that could further mitigate the human wildlife conflict. This Chinna Canal is a former habitat of Arikomban. See, remember this Arikomban was also a wild tusker, and that has created a lot of destruction in Kerala. Okay, so this Chinna Canal is the former habitat of Arikomban. So that is a wild elephant, and that regularly raided the ration shops for rice, and that has also destroyed crops. So after its repeated attacks, the forest officials have actually translocated this Arikomban to a tiger reserve in Tamil Nadu in order to reduce frequent attacks or frequent raids by the Arikomban wild elephant. However, we must understand the isolation of the elephant population in the Chinna Canal. Okay, so the panel which has been looking after the creation of elephant corridors actually underscored the critical importance of providing access to the broader Munnar landscape. Now see, we should not isolate the tiger population. So when we have a fragmented forest patches, we are just isolating them to a specific forest landscape. Rather than isolating them in a specific forest landscape, what we must do, we should build these elephant corridors, and we should provide a broader Munnar landscape or broader forest landscape for these elephants. See, elephants are also migratory species. So for the migration from one place to another place, they require a broader forest landscape, and this committee or expert panel has also recommended such a broader forest landscape. And in fact, securing such elephant corridor between Anairankal and Old Devikulam, spanning a 60-acre Shola forest, it can actually facilitate free movement of wild elephants and give them access to 4,500 square kilometers area within the Munnar landscape. So this essentially means that we are not isolating these elephants in a very limited area of forest. Rather, we have been providing a huge forest land or landscape for these elephants, and so that they can migrate from one place to another place freely. Okay, so because it is a huge forest land, and we have been providing access to such a huge forest land. And after that, we must also install the solar fencing around these ration shops, so that we can prevent the frequent raids or frequent attacks of these wild elephants onto the ration shops for rice. And in fact, the panel has also recommended the close observation of these elephants or tuskers to prevent them approaching human habitations. So please understand, when they approach the human habitations, and that is where the human wildlife conflict starts, and that is where either human beings would be killed or animals would be killed, and that is not good for the ecosystem sustainability. And in this context, they should not be captured under the pretext of damage they cause to the property. Rather, presence of such tuskers is a very important or very critical in maintaining the genetic viability of these populations. Now, when we have a fragmented forest acts, generally what happens? So it would result in inbreeding among these tusker populations, and inbreeding would make them less susceptible to the diseases. Okay, so they will not be able to develop immunity for new diseases, and that could significantly decline their populations of wild elephants. Now, in fact, elephants also play one of the most important and most prominent role in the entire ecosystem, right? So therefore, in this context, we must ensure a viable populations of elephants. Please also understand, these elephants are also known as keystone species as well as the umbrella species. So therefore, we must understand the importance of elephants for environment protection, environmental conservation, and we must also involve community participation in protection of or managing viable elephant populations, and we must build these elephant corridors connecting different forest fragmented forest landscapes. So, and they will help in reducing the human wildlife conflict or decline in elephant population. Next article is about the poultry industry. So in this article, the author has been talking about the reforms required in the, or reforms necessary for the poultry industry. Now, we all knew that the poultry industry is one of the major economic activity in India, and it is a source of nutrition for us, and at the same time it has also been providing a viable livelihood opportunities for the different sectors of India's population. So therefore, keeping this in mind, the poultry industry is also very often known for using antibiotics, and antibiotics are also associated with the antibiotic resistance among human beings and other negative health impacts. And at the same time, the poultry industry is also associated with certain diseases such as avian influenza, and that has the higher mortality rate if it impacts or if it infects the human populations as well. So in this context, we will understand all these things in this article in a very detailed manner. Now, what is the context of this article? See, the context is that the current outbreak of H5N1 virus, so that is avian influenza, and it is known as H5N1 virus. So this particular virus is a disaster that yet to happen, or disaster waiting to happen, as experts have already warned about this, particularly because of unsafe conditions at industrial livestock production that has largely followed since last 10 years. Okay, so unsafe, unscientific conditions that are actually prevailed in the livestock production or livestock rearing with respect to the poultry industry is actually a major threat that human race would face from this H5N1 virus. Now, please understand that we all knew about the One Health approach of the Union government. So this One Health approach of the Union government actually emphasizes on the health of human beings plus animals and along with that the ecosystem health would also be taken into consideration. See, this One Health approach had become more popular especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, and we all knew that how COVID-19 pandemic had created a lot of negative impact or a lot of implications across the different countries. So because since COVID-19 is a zoonotic disease, a disease which which is contagious and which passes from the animals to human beings, at the same time this H5N1 virus is also a zoonotic disease, and in this context the One Health approach plays a very important. So animal welfare is closely interlinked with the public health ecosystem and the biodiversity conservation, and that is actually the One Health principle emphasized by the World Health Organization. Understand, the animal health is actually closely linked or closely interlinked with the human being's health and the biodiversity conservation also, and that is the crux of the One Health approach. However, if we can talk about this H1N1 infection, so this infection affects or infects humans directly from the chickens, and this infection was first reported in Hong Kong in 1997. However, the first case of H5N1 virus in India was registered in Maharashtra 2006. So an outbreak in 2020 and early 2021 spread across different states. Okay, so therefore the H5N1 virus had been regularly infecting people in different states within India also. However, it has a potential to infect people in a large scale because it is a contagious disease, and that could pose serious challenges to the existing public healthcare system, and it would also associate with the larger mortality of the people, especially in a country with the highest population in the world. And in fact, the pathogen which causes this H5N1 virus actually crossed several barriers. Okay, so these they have actually crossed the species barriers. Now what does this mean? Species barriers in the sense that now they can infect any species. Originally they found in the chicks, but chicks of the poultry industry, but they can infect any other species also, like they can also infect human beings also. So now they have become more potent and they also crossed the species barriers, and this has caused a large scale mortality among the polar bears. The large scale death of the polar bears is commonly associated with this H5N1 pathogen in the Arctic region, and in fact it also led to the killing of seals and seagulls in Antarctica. Okay, so these species have a prominent role in the food chain in those Antarctica and Arctic ecosystems, but this pathogen has even had a worse impact on polar bears, seagulls and seals. So therefore the potency of this particular pathogen must be understood. So with humans, the World Health Organization estimates that the fatality rate of H5N1 at 52%. Okay, so the total individuals infected with the H5N1 virus, 52% of the individuals would die. So that essentially means that if it infects 100 individuals, and out of 100 individuals 52 individuals would die. So this is actually based on the previous estimates by the World Health Organization from the infected people. Okay, so almost all cases of human infection with the avian influenza A, so that is also known as H5N1. H5N1 is avian influenza A. So almost all infections, please understand it is a contagious disease, but almost all infections of this avian influenza are actually linked to a close contact with infected birds and contaminated environments. Now if you look at Indian poultry industry, we can say that it is a contaminated industry. So since it is a contaminated industry, and that is where the problem actually starts, and that contaminated environment actually provide breeding grounds for the multiplication of these pathogens, and the negative consequences of the pathogen would further increase. So these contaminated environments the resultant air quality and waste problem has significant footprint in India, right? Because see, we have the poultry industry, large scale presence of poultry industry because of a huge demand for these poultry birds. So even though we have a large scale poultry industry, it is unsafe. We can categorize this as unsafe and unscientific poultry industry. Unsafe and unscientific poultry industry, and that has a significant footprint in India. Why? Because its odor, particulate matter that it releases, PM 2.5 and PM 10, and other greenhouse gas emissions. So please understand, the poultry industry is also associated with the release of greenhouse gases, such as they could release nitrous oxide or nitrogen dioxide. They can also release methane or those other things. Okay, so in fact, the Central Pollution Control Board has also classified the poultry industry or poultry units which have more than 500 birds as polluting industry, because that actually requires compliance and regulatory consent to establish and operate. So for that particular reason, the Central Pollution Control Board has classified these poultry units as polluting industry, because when the poultry industry actually releases a lot of pollutants and a lot of contaminants into the environment, and because of that reason, the Central Pollution Control Board had actually categorized these units as a polluting industry. And in fact, they also use several antibiotics. Why the poultry industry actually use these antibiotics? Because of the faster growth. Now please understand, a chick generally becomes a matured one, but it takes around 3 months of time. So around 3 months of time, but a chick becomes a matured one with the use of antibiotics in just 45 days, so that these poultry industry can meet the huge demand for meat in the market, and that is where they have been using these antibiotics. And in fact, antibiotics are not considered good for the human health, and they also associated with increasing antibiotic resistance. So that has to be tackled at any cost, because antibiotic resistance among human beings would make the existing medication would be lesser effective. So thereby increased mortality and at the same time increased vulnerability of the people to these diseases. Okay, so however, the antibiotics which are classified as critically important and highly important by the World Health Organization, so they're actually widely sold for farmers for the preventive uses. Okay, see, this avian influenza A is a challenge in the poultry industry, but now in order to prevent avian influenza A, the World Health Organization actually recommends some critical antibiotics, so they can be used, so that could prevent the avian influenza A virus. Okay, so this actually this critical antibiotics actually prescribed to day-to-day chicks to reduce the likelihood of disease and mortality among these young chicks. So this practice is still being commonly recommended, so that could tackle the avian influenza A in these young chicks. However, the animals are heavily stocked in unsanitary conditions. So I've already told you that the Indian poultry industry is unsafe and unscientific. So therefore, if you look at these poultry industries, the young chicks are actually stocked in an unsanitary conditions. So not only does this have a detrimental effect on the welfare of the animals, now when you have stocked all those bird species in an unsanitary conditions, of course that could have a detrimental effect on the welfare of these bird populations, and at the same time this could also worsen or it is also detrimental to the health of the consumers who consume the meat of these birds. However, it also poses significant risks to the people who are working in these facilities and residing within the vicinity of this area. So therefore it is a huge challenge, because persons who regularly make a contact with these birds are highly vulnerable for the H5N1 virus. And at the same time, the people who are living nearby or in the vicinity of the poultry industry, which is very often unsafe and unscientific, they also exposed to the H5N1 virus. So please understand that the mortality of the H5N1 virus is around 52%. And apart from these negative consequences, so it is also associated with emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and the waste which is being released from the poultry industry contaminating the existing water systems, and even the solid waste has also been creating soil pollution or contaminating the soils of the nearby areas. Okay, so when they have been contaminating soil, water and air, then there will be detrimental impact on human health, other animals and environment as well. Okay, so in fact the fecal matter, okay, so the end product of this particular poultry industry is being used as a fertilizer by the local farmers. Yes, to some extent or to a minor extent, using the fecal matter from the poultry industry is good for the fertilizer, good as a fertilizer. But the problem is that the amount of piled up manure actually exceeds the carrying capacity of the land and becomes a pollutant. Now, why carrying capacity comes here? Now, please understand here, we have, poultry animal waste, and this poultry animal waste can be used for the purposes of, or it can be used as a fertilizer. So that is a good thing. But what if we have excessive amounts of these fertilizer and that is lying on the soil? Because the soil microbes cannot be able to decompose and convert this inorganic matter. Rather, so there is a certain limit for these soil microbes to convert this into the fertilizer. So therefore, when the soil microbes capacity is exceeded, or there is an excess waste lying on the soil and soil microbes do not have the enough capacity to decompose this existing waste material, so that could result in several negative consequences, because it would destroy the crops. Okay, so it will have a detrimental effect on the crops, because the piles of waste becoming a breeding ground for the diseases of various vectors such as flies. Okay, so in fact this could have a detrimental impact, because that will have work as a function as a breeding ground for various other disease causing vectors. Now, as I have already told you that these animals in the poultry industry are actually stocked up in an unsafe conditions. So this intensive confinement actually violates the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act of 1960. Now please remember, the Parliament of India had passed 1960 Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So therefore, the intensive confinement of these birds in those unsanitary, unhygienic environment actually violates the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Now, what legal reforms we must undertake in this context? So there are certain legal reforms. We must proceed with those legal reforms. So they include, with more open, cleaner and ventilated living spaces for the poultry industry or for the poultry bird, they less likely need a constant antibiotics. Now, if we can be able to provide safe environment, a scientific environment, a healthy environment for these poultry birds, then there is no need to use these antibiotics. Okay, so they will not there is no need to use excessive amount of antibiotics, and if we use a lesser amount of antibiotics, that would in fact benefit the health of the consumers of this particular poultry meat. And it would also reduce the antimicrobial resistance. Okay, so therefore we must be able to ensure a safe living conditions for these poultry birds without violating the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960. And apart from that, there is a requirement for the strict oversight for compliance and enforcement of various environmental regulations, and that is the actual need of the hour. Okay, so in fact, the Central Pollution Control Board reclassification of the poultry industry as a highly polluting orange category industry is a step in the right direction, because when poultry industry is recognized as a high polluting orange category industry, then the concerted measures would be taken to ensure that the poultry industry would not result in excessive contamination of the existing natural resources, and at the same time the farmers would be able to provide a safe conditions for these poultry birds. However, in the light of bird flu concerns or associated public health crisis and climate emergency, it is very important or very crucial situation that have to be addressed. See, understand that existing climate change, biodiversity degradation, and increasing human wildlife conflicts, so all these factors have been making pandemics more common than before. So we have understood the negative impact of these pandemics on human populations and even on the environment as well. So therefore we must adopt the One Health approach, and at the same time a proper regulatory oversight over the poultry industry is very, very important, because that could prevent the further outbreak and spread of H5N1 virus, that is also known as avian influenza virus A. So next important news article is with respect to the unclassed forests. Now, why unclassed forests are missing is the article. Now in this particular article we will understand what are these unclassed forests and why these unclassed forests are missing. So in compliance with February 19, 2024 Supreme Court order, the Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change uploaded various state expert committee reports on its website earlier in April 2024. Now in this context we'll understand what are these unclassed forests. So unclassed forests are actually an area which is recorded as forest area, but it is not included as a reserved forest and protected forest category. Now see, there are certain reserved forests and protected forests also, with respect to the a certain degree of protection being extended to these forest categories. And in this context, the unclassed forests are actually an area of forest recorded as a forest but not included in either reserved forest or protected forest category. However, recently the Forest Conservation Amendment Act, so FCAA is Forest Conservation Amendment Act, that has been passed by the Union government. So as per this particular legislation, the unclassed forests which earlier enjoyed the legal protection under the landmark TN Godavarman Tirumalpad 1996 case. So in this case, the Supreme Court has accorded legal status to these unclassed forests. But under this Forest Conservation Amendment Act, the legal status for these unclassed forests would be, they would lose this legal status, and that could further leads to the inevitable diversion of the existing forests. However, all categories of forests, irrespective of the ownership of the forest, for example, a certain forest, agroforestry is a forest type, and agroforestry is owned by the private individuals. And on the other hand, there are certain government owned forest areas. So all categories of forest, irrespective of ownership and notification status of those forests, have to be included under the ambit of the Forest Conservation Act 1980. So that was passed in 1980. So as a result of this Forest Conservation Act 1980, these unclassed forests, so these unclassed forests are also known as the deemed forests. So they require central government's approval in case of a project proponent sought to divert that land for non-forest use. Okay. And apart from that, the unclassed or deemed forests may belong to the forest or forest department, revenue department, railways and other government entities, and even the community forests and even the forests which are under the private ownership as well. Okay, so these unclassed forests or deemed forests may belong to the different categories or different departments. However, so this was in response to the criticism that the proposed law actually undermined the Goda Verman judgment, which has provided the legal status, to the unclassed or deemed forests in India. Because the Forest Conservation Amendment Act would actually make these deemed forests or unclassed forests would lose their legal status. Okay, so as of now, no state has provided a verifiable data on the identification, what was the status of these unclassed forests and location of unclassed forests. So now, if every state provides certain verifiable data with respect to the unclassed forests or deemed forests, then we would be able to take a certain concerted measures for the protection of these forests. See, forest cover is very, very important in this context. Especially at a time when we are facing the challenges from the climate change. So the government has also been taking up certain measures for the purpose of afforestation. Now in this context, we should not afford losing our key forest tracts. So in fact, there were 7 states and union territories include Goa, Haryana, Jammu Kashmir, Ladakh, Lakshadweep, Tamil Nadu and West Bengal. So they not even constituted the expert committees, the state expert committees at all. So these state expert committees have given the responsibility of identifying these unclassed forests. Okay, so providing verifiable data on these unclassed or deemed forests, but there are several states and union territories, they have not yet constituted these state expert panels. In fact, 23 states have shared their reports, but only 17 are in line with the Supreme Court's directives with respect to these classed forests or deemed forests. So in this image, you can see there are different forest categories that are being marked in different, colors. So however, the report says that only 9 states have provided the extent of unclassed forests in India so far. However, there was no baseline data from 1996 to 1997, and even we don't have any idea about how much unclassed forests have been lost so far. So it is true that these forests are lost quickly, because even though we have extended the legal status for these unclassed forests or deemed forests, they have been facing a lot of challenges, and because of that reason we are losing these unclassed forests at a faster pace. For example, the Kerala's State Expert Committee did not include the Pallivasal unreserved, so that is ecologically fragile area in Munnar region, and this has also faced a devastating flood during 2018. Okay, so therefore the deemed forests or the unclassed forests are not properly identified by the state expert committees. However, the promulgation of the Forest Conservation Amendment Act without actually examining the reports submitted by the state expert committees on these unclassed forests and deemed forest actually displays a lack of diligence from the Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change, and it will have consequences for India's ecosystem and even the ecological sensitivity. Now, why forest lands are very important and why governments have been increasingly emphasizing on the forestation? Because see, forestation actually provides livelihoods for the local populations, and forest areas actually influences the local climate of an area, and they actually source of food, fodder and fiber for the local population, and they support the biodiversity of an area, and they also play a very important role in water recharging the groundwater tables. So they also reduce or prevent soil erosion, and they also prevent the desertification. Okay, so all these factors have we have seen that all these factors are taking place at a faster pace because of the climate change. So therefore, in this context, it is very important that we must understand the critical importance that are being played by these forest areas. We should not try to defragment the existing forest lands, Rather, we must take concerted actions to identify these deemed forests, unclassed forests, and at the same time promote the conservation, the positive conservation and deforestation drives. So the next important article is with respect to the Indian Ocean region and how this Indian Ocean has been accelerating at a very faster pace. So that is what we must understand here. So the context of this particular article is that from 1950 to 2020, the Indian Ocean actually become warmer by 1.2 degree Celsius. And the climate models expect that it would further heat up to 1.7 degrees Celsius to 3.8 degrees Celsius from 2020 to 2100. See, rising the Indian Ocean surface temperatures would have a lot of negative consequences, especially for all the littoral countries in the Indian Ocean region. Now, what are those consequences? We will understand a little while. However, we are very often familiar with the heat waves on land. So the marine heat waves and their counterparts in the sea. Okay, so we have been regularly experiencing heat wave like conditions across different parts of our country. So in a similar way, we also have the marine heat waves over the surface of the ocean, and these marine heat waves are actually linked to the rapid formation of cyclones, and they are actually expected to increase tenfold from the current average of 20 days per year to 220 to 250 days per year over a period of next few decades. Okay, so that is having a lot of negative consequences. So the negative consequences include near permanent heat wave state, so that would prevalent on Indian Ocean, and that could further increase the coral bleaching. Now please understand, these coral reefs are mostly located in the tropical waters in Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean and Atlantic Ocean. So therefore the coral bleaching would impact the marine biodiversity, and at the same time it would lead to the extinction of the species at a faster pace, and along with the extinction of species, it would also impact the livelihoods of the coastal communities, and not just livelihoods, it will also impact the nutrition security of the populations because of the declining populations and at the same time the extinction of species. And after that, the seagrass destruction would also takes place because of the higher temperature, and the seagrass would not be susceptible to higher temperatures, and loss of kelp forests actually play a very important role as natural sinks of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and in fact they absorb carbon dioxide and store carbon dioxide and reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and they actually instrumental in reducing the global warming. Okay, so apart from that, it will also affect the fishery sector or fishery industry and the livelihoods of the coastal communities. So therefore the heating of the ocean was not merely restricted to the surface, but it also went deeper and increased the overall wheat content of the ocean as well, right? So this is not just limited to the surface of this Indian Ocean, but it would penetrate deeper into the ocean, and that is also associated with the lot of negative consequences. Now, apart from that, the rising heat actually contributes to the sea level rise. Okay, see, understand that when temperatures have been increasing over the surface of the ocean, so that would lead to the more expansion of the water, and expansion of the water would lead to the sea level rise. And in fact, the heat causes the volume of water to increase and called the thermal expansion of water. So this phenomenon is known as thermal expansion of the water, and this thermal expansion of the water is actually responsible for more than half of the sea level rise in the Indian Ocean. Okay, see, when sea levels are rising in the Indian Ocean, all the littoral states would be submerged, especially the coastal cities or the coastal areas would be submerged, and that would lead to the migration of people from these coastal areas, and that could even create rehabilitation and resettlement issues and creates the problem of climate refuge. Okay, so and that could even increase the pressure on the existing limited resources in a country like India with the highest population. Most possibly all South Asian countries would face the brunt of rising sea levels in the Indian Ocean. So apart from rising sea levels, increased temperatures would also create deadly cyclones in the Indian Ocean region or associated Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal, and that could create a large scale destruction and havoc across the coastal areas in India. So these are the negative consequences that are being associated with increasing sea surface temperatures of the Indian Ocean. Okay, so that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you so much.